Order in the court. Judge Ramsey's voice barely registered before Officer Denton's palm cracked across Congresswoman Zaria Thorne's cheek, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent courtroom. To him, her testimony was an assault on everything he stood for, a black woman challenging his authority, dismantling his career with nothing but truth. "Know your place," he hissed, voice low enough that only she could hear the venom behind his public mask. "The court will reflect that Officer Denton just physically assaulted me," she stated, her voice steady despite the red welt blooming on her cheek. "She provoked me. These people always twist the facts," he barked, pointing a finger that trembled with rage. He thought he was silencing her testimony. Instead, he just handed her the match to burn his whole world down. Because she wasn't just any witness. She was Congresswoman Thorne, former civil rights attorney with 20 years of courtroom battles behind her. Now she stood calmly, rubbing her cheek. No rage, no tears, just pure, focused calculation. What will happen when she finally speaks? How will Officer Denton face the storm he's unleashed? Will his badge be enough to save him now? And what justice awaits when power strikes the powerful? Let's watch as 4 minutes of testimony changes everything forever. The Westbrook County Courthouse stood like a weathered sentinel in the heart of downtown, its limestone facade gleaming under the harsh July sun. Built in the 1920s, its imposing columns and broad steps had witnessed generations of justice and injustice alike. Today those steps teemed with protesters, their signs bobbing like buoys in a restless sea. Police accountability now, and justice for Marcus Reynolds. Inside, courtroom 3B hummed with tension. Wood-paneled walls absorbed the whispers, the ceiling fans lazily pushing hot air around the packed gallery. The familiar smells of furniture polish, sweat, and anxiety mingled as the citizens of Westbrook watched the most controversial police shooting case in their town's history unfold. At the witness stand sat Congresswoman Zaria Thorne, poised, focused, and unshakable in her tailored navy suit. At 48, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced down injustice in courtrooms for decades before winning her congressional seat 3 years ago. Her natural hair was styled in a sophisticated twist, silver strands catching the light from the tall windows. Small, elegant earrings and a simple gold necklace completed her appearance. Professional, polished, intentional. 20 feet away stood Officer Brock Denton, a 15-year veteran of the Westbrook Police Department. His dress uniform strained against his broad shoulders, medals and commendations displayed prominently on his chest. At 42, his face showed the weathering of street patrols and late nights, lines etched deep around cold blue eyes. His jaw worked constantly, clenching and unclenching as he watched Thorne testify. Between them sat Judge Frederick Ramsey, 60, his wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed documents. His reputation for impartiality had made him the natural choice for this powder keg of a case. District Attorney Vanessa Liu maintained a careful poker face as she questioned Congresswoman Thorne, who had been called as an expert witness on police use of force protocols. Having authored legislation on police reform, Thorne's testimony carried exceptional weight. In the first row behind the defense table sat Police Chief Warren Griffith, his expression grim as Thorne methodically dissected the department's training failures. Beside him, Mayor Patricia Holloway shifted uncomfortably, painfully aware of the cameras in the gallery and the potential political fallout. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Congresswoman Thorne leaned into the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering. "Based on my analysis of the body camera footage, Officer Denton violated 7 specific departmental protocols in his confrontation with Marcus Reynolds." And that's when everything exploded. Officer Denton's composure cracked like thin ice under a heavy boot. His face flushed crimson as Thorne continued her methodical dismantling of his actions the night Marcus Reynolds, an unarmed black teenager, was shot during what should have been a routine traffic stop. Furthermore, Thorne continued, referencing the document before her, the officer's body camera clearly shows him approaching with the weapon drawn before any identification was requested, a direct violation of Department Policy Section 4.3. "That's a damn lie," Denton erupted, his outburst causing Judge Ramsey to bang his gavel sharply. The officer's defense attorney, Elliot Chambers, placed a restraining hand on his client's arm, but it was too late. "Officer Denton, you will control yourself in my courtroom," warned Judge Ramsey, his voice cutting through the murmurs rippling through the gallery. Denton's attorney rose quickly. "Your Honor, may I request a brief recess to confer with my client?" "Denied," said Judge Ramsey flatly. "Congresswoman Thorne, please continue your testimony." The Congresswoman nodded, unruffled by the outburst. "As I was saying, the footage contradicts Officer Denton's sworn statement that Mr. Reynolds made threatening movements. In fact, the video clearly shows, 'You don't know what it's like out there,' Denton suddenly shouted, shaking off his attorney's restraining hand. 'You sit in your ivory tower in Washington while we're in the streets dealing with these thugs.'" A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Judge Ramsey banged his gavel repeatedly. "Officer, that is enough." But Denton was beyond reason now, years of resentment boiling over as he pointed accusingly at Thorne. "You're twisting everything, making me out to be some kind of monster because I did my job." "Your job," Thorne replied calmly, "does not include shooting unarmed teenagers 7 times. Something snapped in Denton's eyes. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, pushing past the bailiff and crossing to the witness stand in 3 long strides. His open palm struck Congresswoman Thorne's face with such force that her head snapped sideways. Time stopped. Cameras flashed, and in that frozen moment, Denton's career ended, though he didn't know it yet. Chaos erupted instantly. The bailiffs sprang into action, tackling Officer Denton to the marble floor. Judge Ramsey shouted for order as spectators leapt to their feet. Phones captured every second. The assault, the takedown, and most importantly, Congresswoman Thorne's response. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. She simply touched her reddening cheek, her expression almost curious as she observed the man being restrained on the floor. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the pandemonium with remarkable clarity, "I would like the record to show that Officer Denton has just physically assaulted a sitting member of the United States Congress during sworn testimony." The judge, still standing, nodded gravely. "So noted, Congresswoman. Bailiffs, remove Officer Denton and place him in custody immediately." As they hauled Denton to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You people always play the victim. You come into my town. Officer Denton," Judge Ramsey thundered, "you are held in contempt of court. Remove him now." As Denton was dragged toward the door, still shouting obscenities, his attorney collapsed into his chair, head in hands, knowing his case had just imploded spectacularly. District Attorney Liu approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state wishes to add assault charges immediately." Through it all, Thorne remained seated in the witness box, her posture straight, her gaze steady. The cameras captured her dignity in perfect contrast to Denton's unraveling. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. The real fight was just beginning. "Congresswoman, do you need medical attention?" Judge Ramsey asked, genuine concern in his voice as the courtroom gradually settled. Thorne straightened the papers before her. "I'm fine, Your Honor. I'd like to continue my testimony if the court permits." A murmur of amazement rippled through the gallery. The woman had just been assaulted, yet her voice remained steady, her demeanor unshaken. "Are you certain?" the judge pressed. "Absolutely," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "The issues before this court are far more important than one man's inability to control his temper. Marcus Reynolds deserves justice, and I intend to see that he gets it." Judge Ramsey nodded, impressed despite himself. "Very well. When you're ready, Congresswoman." Thorne took a sip of water and began. The courtroom settled into an expectant hush as Congresswoman Thorne adjusted the microphone. The red mark on her cheek stood out starkly against her brown skin, but her eyes were clear and focused. District Attorney Liu approached the witness stand. "Congresswoman Thorne, are you able to continue?" she asked. "I am," Thorne replied. She glanced at the large clock on the courtroom wall, noting the time, 2:43 p.m. What happened in the next few minutes would become legendary in legal circles across America. "Your Honor," Thorne began, "with your permission, I'd like to address the court directly regarding what just occurred, as it bears directly on my expert testimony." Judge Ramsey considered for a moment, then nodded. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, I'll allow it." Thorne turned to face the gallery, which had swelled with reporters who'd rushed in after hearing about the assault. Camera phones remained raised, live streaming to millions. "What you just witnessed," she said, her voice gathering strength with each word, "was not an isolated incident. It was the physical manifestation of exactly what my testimony addresses, the culture of impunity that permeates certain sectors of law enforcement." She lifted a document from the stack before her. "I have here Officer Denton's personnel file, which includes 11 civilian complaints for excessive force, 9 of which involved Black or Latino individuals. Not one of these complaints resulted in disciplinary action." Chief Griffith shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Thorne continued, "This pattern of behavior doesn't develop overnight. It grows in environments where accountability is absent and prejudice goes unchallenged." She turned a page in her notes. The body camera footage of Marcus Reynolds' shooting shows Officer Denton using racial slurs before he even approached the vehicle. It shows him ignoring Mr. Reynolds' repeated attempts to comply with conflicting commands. And most damning of all, it shows him planting evidence after the shooting. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. This revelation hadn't been made public before. "Frame marker 184213, Thorne specified clinically. "Officer Denton can be clearly seen removing a small object from his left pocket and placing it beside Mr. Reynolds' unconscious body. Analysis confirms this object matched the knife later presented as justification for the shooting." Mayor Holloway paled visibly while Chief Griffith stared stonily ahead. "Your Honor," Defense Attorney Chambers sputtered, rising to his feet, "this allegation is outrageous and is factual," Thorne cut in smoothly, "and verified by 3 independent forensic video analysts whose reports I've submitted to the court." She held up another document. "This isn't about politics. It's about a systemic failure that cost a 17-year-old boy his life." The clock read 2:45 p.m. 2 minutes had passed. "Westbrook Police Department has a use of force rate against minorities that is 340% higher than the national average," she continued, her voice never rising yet somehow filling every corner of the room. "I have here the department's internal training materials which explicitly instruct officers to approach minority suspects with heightened caution, effectively codifying racial profiling into policy." She placed the document down deliberately. "The same culture that produced these materials produced Officer Denton's behavior today. When confronted with facts he couldn't dispute, he resorted to physical intimidation, just as he did with Marcus Reynolds." The clock read 2:46 p.m. 3 minutes. "Your Honor, members of the court," Thorne said, her gaze sweeping the room, "what happened to me today was witnessed by dozens and captured on camera. I am a congresswoman with resources and platform to ensure accountability. Marcus Reynolds had none of these advantages." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping just enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. "If Officer Denton felt entitled to strike me, a federal official, in open court before a judge, imagine what he felt entitled to do to a scared teenage boy on a dark road with no witnesses but his own body camera which he thought he could control. The clock read 2:47 p.m. 4 minutes had passed. The defense has repeatedly asked why Marcus Reynolds ran from that traffic stop if he had nothing to hide, Thorne concluded. After what we've all witnessed today, I believe the better question is, what wouldn't a young black man do to escape Officer Brock Denton? As she finished speaking, the courtroom remained utterly silent for 3 long seconds. Then, from the back row, someone began to applaud. The sound spread like wildfire until Judge Ramsey's gavel could barely be heard over the thunderous response. 4 minutes, that's all it had taken to change everything. By 3:15 p.m., the video had gone viral. By 4 o'clock p.m., it was playing on every major news network. By 5 p.m., the governor had called a press conference. Inside the courthouse, the aftermath unfolded with stunning swiftness. Judge Ramsey declared a recess, ordering Officer Denton held without bail on charges of contempt of court and assault on a federal official. The defense team's request for a mistrial was denied, with Ramsey stating unequivocally that the defendant's own actions cannot be grounds for nullifying these proceedings. In the judge's chambers, a different scene unfolded. Chief Griffith, Mayor Holloway, District Attorney Liu, and the county's legal counsel huddled around a conference table with expressions ranging from shock to resignation. "This can't be contained," the county attorney said bluntly, scrolling through his phone. "The #ThorneTruth is a trending nationwide. The evidence she presented about the planted knife, is it valid?" Chief Griffith's silence was answer enough. Mayor Holloway removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. 3 independent forensic analysts verified it? And none of you thought to mention this before we ended up here? "We needed to protect the department," Griffith finally muttered. "Protect?" Leo's laugh was hollow. "Chief, there's no protecting anyone now. Your department is about to become the poster child for police reform legislation across the country." A knock at the door interrupted them. Judge Ramsey's clerk entered, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "The Attorney General's office is on line 1, and Congresswoman Thorne's chief of staff is requesting a meeting with all parties before proceedings resume." The mayor nodded dully. "Of course she is." Meanwhile, in a small conference room down the hall, Congresswoman Thorne sat alone, eyes closed, taking her first real moment of privacy since the assault. The pain in her cheek had dulled to an ache, but she didn't regret refusing the ice pack. That mark needed to be seen, needed to be photographed, documented, remembered. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, constituents, and media. One text from her sister simply read, "Mom would be proud." Thorne allowed herself a small smile at that. Their mother had been one of the first black female officers in Westbrook's police department, forced out after reporting her partner for excessive force in 1988. The irony wasn't lost on her. When her chief of staff knocked and entered, Thorne was once again the composed, strategic congresswoman the public knew. "They're ready to deal," he said. "Good," she replied, standing smoothly. "Then let's change some laws." The afternoon's events triggered a cascade of consequences that unfolded with unprecedented speed. Within 24 hours, the Justice Department announced a formal investigation into the Westbrook Police Department. Attorney General Eliza Montgomery personally called Congresswoman Thorne, assuring her that the full resources of the federal government would be deployed to examine the department's patterns and practices. Officer Denton, held in the county jail, found himself abandoned by the police union that had previously defended his every action. Their statement, carefully worded by crisis management consultants, expressed shock and dismay at his completely unacceptable conduct, and emphasized that his actions do not reflect the values of law enforcement professionals. By the second morning, Chief Griffith submitted his resignation, effective immediately. 3 hours later, the mayor announced the formation of a civilian oversight board with real teeth and subpoena power to review police conduct. The hastily assembled press conference featured the mayor standing awkwardly beside Mara Reynolds, Marcus's mother, whose dignified grief had been largely ignored by city officials until cameras made her impossible to dismiss. "My son would still be alive if this oversight had existed last year," Mrs. Reynolds stated simply, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "No mother should have to fight this hard for the truth about her child's death." In Washington, Congresswoman Thorne's colleagues from both parties rushed to denounce the assault. Even her usual political opponents found themselves unable to defend what millions had witnessed. Senator Maxwell Pierce, a staunch opponent of police reform, released a statement calling the incident deeply disturbing and acknowledging that when issues of basic physical safety in our courtrooms are at stake, partisan politics must take a back seat to common decency. On day 3, the trial of Officer Denton for the shooting of Marcus Reynolds was declared a mistrial, not because of the assault on Thorne, but because forensic experts confirmed what Thorne had testified: the knife had indeed been planted. District Attorney Liu immediately announced new, expanded charges against Denton: second-degree murder, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and perjury. The courthouse steps became a gathering place for citizens demanding change. What began as dozens grew to hundreds, then thousands, not just in Westbrook but in cities across the country where similar cases had festered without resolution. Inside her Washington office, Congresswoman Thorne watched these developments with measured satisfaction. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a deep purple, which she made no attempt to conceal during her televised floor speech introducing the Marcus Reynolds Police Accountability Act. "This bill isn't about revenge," she told her colleagues, many of whom refused to meet her eyes as cameras zoomed in on her injury. "It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of badge or uniform, stands above the law they've sworn to uphold." The legislation passed with veto-proof majorities in both chambers. Federal Courtroom 2A was considerably larger than the county courthouse where Officer Denton had struck Congresswoman Thorne 6 months earlier. The polished oak and modern lighting created an atmosphere of austere formality as Denton's federal civil rights trial reached its climax. Gone was his crisp uniform with shining badges. Today, he wore a department store suit that hung poorly on his frame, which had grown noticeably thinner during his pretrial detention. The swagger had vanished too, replaced by a hunched posture and darting eyes that rarely lifted to meet those of anyone in the courtroom. The prosecution had methodically built their case over 2 weeks, presenting forensic evidence, expert testimony, and the devastating body camera footage that showed exactly what happened the night Marcus Reynolds died. But today's witness was the one everyone had been waiting for. "The United States calls Congresswoman Zaria Thorne," announced the federal prosecutor. Conversations hushed as Thorne entered and took the oath. The bruise on her face had long since faded, but the impact of that moment remained indelible in the public consciousness. Every major network carried the proceedings live. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. Having helped draft the legislation under which Denton was being prosecuted, she explained to the jury in precise terms how his actions violated not just department policy but federal law. "Based on the evidence presented in this court," she stated, "Officer Denton made a series of conscious decisions that night. He chose to approach with weapon drawn. He chose to escalate rather than de-escalate. He chose to shoot an unarmed teenager 7 times, and afterward, he chose to plant evidence to justify those choices." Denton's attorney tried repeatedly to paint Thorne as politically motivated, but each attempt backfired as she calmly redirected attention to the facts of the case. "My motivation isn't political," she responded when directly challenged. "My motivation is ensuring that what happened to Marcus Reynolds never happens to another American citizen. That's not politics, that's basic human decency. When asked about the assault she had suffered, Thorne's answer silenced the courtroom. What happened to me was witnessed by hundreds and captured on camera. I received immediate support and justice. Marcus Reynolds had none of those advantages. If we truly believe in equal justice under law, the very words inscribed on the Supreme Court, then we must ensure that the Marcus Reynoldses of this world receive the same justice as members of Congress. The defense had no further questions. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. As the forewoman read the decision, Denton's shoulders slumped, the final collapse of a man who had never imagined being held accountable. Judge Miranda Ortiz, a veteran federal judge known for her fairness and thoroughness, scheduled sentencing for the following month. When that day arrived, the courtroom was packed once again. "Mr. Denton," Judge Ortiz began, "this court has considered your service record, the circumstances of your offense, and the broader impact of your actions on the community you swore to protect. The violation of public trust represented by your conduct cannot be overstated." She leaned forward slightly. "When officers of the law behave lawlessly, the very foundation of our justice system is undermined. When those entrusted with badges and weapons treat certain citizens as inherently suspicious or less deserving of dignity, they violate not just departmental policy but the Constitution itself." Denton received 20 years in federal prison, a sentence that sent shockwaves through police departments nationwide. Beyond the courtroom, the case's impact continued to ripple outward. The Justice Department's investigation into Westbrook PD uncovered patterns of misconduct spanning decades. The resulting consent decree mandated top-to-bottom reforms: new use-of-force policies, comprehensive racial bias training, body cameras with strict compliance protocols, and civilian oversight with real authority. More significantly, similar investigations were launched in 12 other jurisdictions across the country. Police unions that had reflexively defended officers regardless of conduct began internal reckonings, with younger members pushing for accountability measures from within. The Marcus Reynolds Police Accountability Act fundamentally reshaped law enforcement nationwide. Federal funding became contingent on implementing reforms. A national database of officer misconduct prevented problem officers from simply moving to new departments. Qualified immunity, once a nearly impenetrable shield, was significantly narrowed. In Westbrook itself, the changes were both symbolic and substantive. Streets were renamed, leadership overhauled, and community policing initiatives implemented with genuine community involvement. Where distrust had festered for generations, tentative bridges began to form. For the Reynolds family, no policy change could bring back their son. But Mara Reynolds found purpose in her grief, becoming a powerful advocate for victims' families. The settlement she received, $12 million from the city and department, established the Marcus Reynolds Foundation, funding scholarships and youth development programs in communities like the one her son had called home. When asked by a reporter if justice had been served, Mrs. Reynolds' answer was nuanced. "Justice would be my son alive and heading to college this fall. What we've received instead is accountability, and the hope that other mothers won't join this club no one wants to belong to." For a nation long accustomed to different outcomes in such cases, even imperfect progress felt revolutionary. 5 years after the slap that reverberated across America, Congresswoman Zaria Thorne stood at a podium in the newly established Civil Rights Memorial Plaza in Westbrook. Behind her loomed a bronze statue of Marcus Reynolds, not depicted as a victim, but as the university student he never had the chance to become, books in hand and future bright. The crowd gathered for the dedication included faces both familiar and new. Mara Reynolds, now a state legislator championing juvenile justice reform, Judge Ramsey, recently appointed to the federal bench, and dozens of young officers from the transformed Westbrook Police Department. Their presence a testament to how institutions can change when properly motivated. Some ask why I never sued Officer Denton for assaulting me that day, Thorne said, addressing the question many still wondered about. The answer is simple. I recognize that moment not as a personal attack, but as a symptom of a deeper disease, one that required systemic treatment, not individual punishment. She gestured toward the statue. Marcus Reynolds' life mattered. His death, tragic as it was, became a catalyst for change that has saved countless lives since. The real measure of justice isn't in courtroom victories or legislative achievements. It's in the lives not cut short because we finally confronted hard truths about who we are and who we aspire to be. As twilight settled over the plaza, visitors moved quietly through the interactive exhibits documenting both painful history and measurable progress. Among them walked Officer Kiana Reynolds, Marcus's cousin, her new model body camera capturing everything just as it should. Some transformations begin with a single moment. This one began with a slap and ended with a reckoning long overdue.